becoming racist, sexist, or all the other isms. Note that their policy doesn't actually fix this. They're going to argue that the innies have the same knowledge and memories of the outside world as their outie personalities have. So in a situation where the personality is exactly the same as your outie, then workplace discrimination is still likely to occur. Even if they argue that workplace culture is inherently different, those internal experiences will lead to situations where the workplace culture generally shifts towards those isms anyway. That's exactly how racism and sexism works anyway within status quo. But then let me put them between a rock and a hard place. Because if they don't want to argue or they don't want to concede that the memories of the innie are exactly the same as the outie, then they then have to concede that you alter the personality and the memories of the innie, which leads to a larger harm that Seth already explains to you in his Leader of Opposition speech. That you tweak and you reduce the agency of the innie. Later, I said through chat, so you reduce the agency of the innie because you've reduced their function to be able to consent to situations. Agency is a function of through the information that you have access to and the data points that you have access to in order to make an informed decision. And we generally support agency and freedom. As you can see, it is supported by the constitution of most countries in the world. That's why we ban things like slavery, for example, and generally support things that increase agency because we see that as an intrinsic human right, and that the more agency and good options you have access to, the more likely you're able to be happy and fulfilled. The moment in which you reduce the information that the innie has access to, you reduce the capacity for them to exercise their agency. And we think this is an intrinsic harm that exists regardless of how good the situation is in proposition, even if they're happy and eating pizza. But moreover, we want to question the reality and just vibe check proposition case. If it is so true that as an innie you can be happy with your entire life being corporate work, then why don't we all become corporate slaves, give up our weekends and give up all our vacation and leaves and just be happy and eat pizza with our boss? No, this is the problem with proposition. Because even if you assume that these people have had their memories altered and for some reason you think that this is a good thing, you have to contend with the fact that humans are humans at the end of the day. And sometimes they will want meaningful rest and meaningful hobbies outside of corporate slavery. And pizza parties and work and break time like coffee lunch with your workmates just isn't able to give you that fulfillment. And it's probably going to be too late for proposition whip to respond to this, seeing as they failed to engage in the constructive speakers. But then, in terms of reducing the wage gap, I don't necessarily really see how you're able to reduce the wage gap simply because you have no discrimination within the workplace, because these are things that are negotiated outside of the workplace when you're signing contracts before your innie is created. And with workplace discrimination, you're still going to have problems like, maybe white people or have higher pay or hired more simply because the bias still exists outside of this perfect workplace that proposition has created. So even in their best case, they aren't able to solve the root causes of the problem that still lead to suffering both within the corporation and for the outies that opt into these corporations in the first place. That takes down most of their pushes. But then in terms of work-life balance and self-actualization, if the only thing they have to say is that, you're able to dedicate 100% of your energy to your work, we think that's a bad thing if you have to give up your agency in exchange. So biting the bullet and saying, okay, maybe they're able to get 100% on our end, but if we can get 95, 90, or even just 80% dedicated to your work or your life on our side, we think that's a willing trade-off if you're able to maintain your agency and if your personality isn't compartmentalized where one is a lobotomized slave who never gets to enjoy the freedom of the outside world because the moment they stop working, the next memory they have is clocking in again and continuing to work, whereas your outie gets to be the slave master of your innies. So we think that we're willing to take that trade-off at the end of the day. It's worth it. And proposition had to prove to us at Deputy why that trade-off was worth it and why they weren't able to. Then their last standing point is that, okay, maybe you're able to manage your time with your family better because, okay, maybe overtimes don't exist anymore. I don't understand. Just because you have an innie now, I don't see why that corporation still isn't going to pressure you to do things like overtime inside of the corporation. And there's no way for you to protest as an LP because as soon as you come back to consciousness, wait, I logged out an hour later than usual, and your corporation tells you, sorry, your innie had to do some overtime work. Nothing changes. Also, you still have to work for the same amount of time. So even if you aren't cognizant of the time you spend at work, that is still 8 to 9 hours taken away from time with your family. You don't get more time with family on proposition N. Don't let them wash this debate. And with that, I've just taken down the entirety of proposition's case. Note, at the same time, they cannot be hypocritical and say that SEF isn't engaging with their case, and at the same time not engage with our very, very crucial case about agency and corporate slavery. Something, by the way, which you think outweighs workplace discrimination. Because if workplace discrimination is harmful insofar as it restricts agency, the biggest harm you can do is literally enslaving someone to a corporation. So our issue outweighs them, even if you believe in workplace discrimination and wage gap being solved on their end. We think it's ultimately far worse. But before I move on, I'll take a POI from Proposition. Sure.
What does society define as not being able to cross over between personalities?
Sorry, repeat that.
What does your side define as not being able to cross over memories between personalities?
It's very clear in the info slide that you don't get to carry memories on either side, which means that the extent of the memories that you experience as an innie are all going to be from inside the corporation. And insofar as your life and your experience and your quality of life are determined based on the memories that you carry with you, we tell you that your innie practically is no longer able to live any life outside the corporation. But then they're going to say, okay, maybe if they're going to argue some weird case that your personality is different inside the corporation, we've already preempted why that's harmful and like hurts your agency, and why practically, if they're going to argue that just being happy is enough in their best case scenario, then maybe we should just all hook ourselves up to junkie machines where we're constantly happy, even if we aren't living actual meaningful lives. And we have to defend that philosophical intuition pump coming from Seth on opposition if they want to have any chance of winning. And probably it's too late at this point. So we tell you that we're completely winning on the issues of agency and personality. And we tell you that checks and balance are just unlikely to work because if in status quo, we're corporate bylaws and union labor, unions are unable to ensure the safety of workers as is, I don't see how they're able to ensure it when it becomes exponentially harder to penetrate corporations because people aren't able to speak out about work conditions internally because their innies are probably going to be very easily censored by corporations from spreading information because they literally cannot exit the work or their office. So it's very prone to all of the harms that Seth tells you in terms of workplace abuse, and they have to tell us why, even if it isn't likely, why it's less likely to happen than it already does in status quo. Again, too late to build that whip. For all of these reasons, it's a very clear opposition win at this point. Thank you.